Some girls grow up knowing exactly where they come from. This one grew up knowing nothing at all. 19 years, and her whole life fit inside a single cardboard box. A few shirts, a book, a photograph she didn't remember taking. That was all the world had ever handed her. Then came the rain. And the letter, cream-colored, heavy, written in a hand she had never seen, by a woman she had never met. A woman who was already gone, somewhere far out past the city, past the highways, past the edge of everything familiar. An old ranch sat waiting in the dust, shuttered, silent, holding its breath. And buried beneath its floorboards was a truth that would crack a young woman wide open. She had always believed she came from nothing. She was about to discover that someone had been waiting for her all along. The rain came down soft that morning, the kind that doesn't fall so much as settle, like the sky had grown too tired to hold itself up any longer. It grayed the rooftops. It darkened the road. It gathered in the cracks of the old sidewalk and sat there, patient, with nowhere better to be. The girl stood under a sagging awning at the edge of a plain gray building, and in her arms she held a cardboard box. It wasn't heavy. That was the thing she kept coming back to. 19 years of a life, and it weighed less than a sack of flour. Inside the box were a few folded shirts, a worn paperback with a cracked spine, a slip of paper that said she had finished her schooling, a photograph she didn't remember anyone ever taking. That was the whole of it. She was 19. Old enough now, the world had decided, to walk out the front door and become someone else's trouble, or no one's at all. Her name was Cassie. She had a last name too, though she'd never been sure it truly belonged to her. Names were given to children like coats handed down, too big in the shoulders, never quite warm. A man came out behind her, older, tired in the way that good men get tired, when they've spent too many years watching young ones leave and never come back. He turned a ring of keys over in his hand. He didn't need to use them. Some people fidget when they don't know what to say, and he was one of them. "You sure you don't want to wait inside?" he asked. "No," she said. "I'm good." She wasn't, but she'd learned long ago that saying so changed nothing, so she didn't bother saying it. He hesitated. Then he reached inside his coat and drew out an envelope. Cream-colored. Heavier than paper had any right to be. Her name was written across the front in a hand she didn't recognize. Tall letters. Looping. The kind of writing that belonged to another time, when folks still believed a letter could carry a piece of a person across the miles and lay it gently in a stranger's hands. "This came for you," he said, "a while back. They wouldn't let me give it to you. Not until today." She looked at it the way a person looks at a stray dog, wanting to reach, afraid of what might happen if she did. "Who's it from?" "A lawyer," he said, "out past the hills somewhere. Says it's about your family." Family. The word landed in her chest and sank straight to the bottom. It was a word people used too easily around her. Caseworkers, strangers with kind eyes and full hands. They said it like a promise they had no real plan to keep. Said it enough times, maybe, like they hoped the saying might make it true. For her, family had always been a blank space, a door painted on a wall, something a person could press a palm against, but never walk through. She took the envelope. Her fingers were cold. The paper was warm somehow, as if it had been sitting out in a patch of sun. "I don't know what's in it," the man said quietly. But maybe it's something. You deserve something, Cassie. A bus rumbled somewhere past the gray rows of buildings. Her ride to nowhere in particular. He cleared his throat. You got a place to stay tonight? Yeah, she lied. He looked at her a long moment, long enough that she thought, for just a breath, he might say something to make her want to stay a little longer. He didn't. Good luck, he said. She stepped off the porch without a goodbye. She didn't do goodbyes. Nobody had ever stuck around long enough to earn one. The street lamps were still burning, blinking against the wet gray of the morning, confused about whether the day had even started. She walked half a block. Then she stopped beneath one of them. And there, with the rain whispering on her shoulders and the puddles soaking cold through the soles of her shoes, she slid the letter free. The handwriting on the page matched the front. Steady, unhurried, the hand of someone who had taken her time, because she had nothing left to do with that time but this. My dearest Cassie. Her breath caught somewhere high in her throat. If you are reading this, then it means my days have passed, and yours have come. I am sorry I could not be there to hold you, to learn the sound of your voice, to watch you grow into whoever you have become. My name is Eleanor, though most folks who loved me called me Nell. I am your grandmother. The girl nearly dropped the page. A grandmother, a real one, with a name, with a hand that had once moved across this very paper, slow and careful, choosing each word like it mattered. She read on. The rain kept falling, and she curled over the letter the way a woman shields a candle from the wind. Your mother was my daughter. She loved you. Please believe that, even on the days the believing comes hard. But she was carrying a weight too heavy for her to hold, and she set you down because she hoped that someone, somewhere, might give you the softer life she could not. I did not learn that you existed until much later. By then, the doors had already closed. They told me I was too old, too far off, too much of one thing, and not enough of another. So I did the only thing left to me. I waited. A gust of wind threw the rain sideways. She turned her body to keep the page dry, the way you might turn to keep someone sleeping from the cold. I am leaving you the one thing I have to give. A piece of land at the edge of the open country, where the sky stretches too wide to fit inside your eyes all at once. It is worn down. So was I, by the end. But it is yours now. If you want it, it is waiting for you. And if you do not want it, I understand. I only needed you to know one thing, in case no one ever took the time to tell you. You came from somewhere. You belong to someone. You are not a mistake. At the bottom of the page was a name. A man called Walter, who handled such things. A telephone number. And the name of a town she had never once heard spoken aloud. She stood there a long time. The rain didn't ease. It just kept on, soft and steady. The way grief does. The way certain truths do. Once they found their way inside you and decided to stay. She looked at the photograph that had slipped loose from the envelope. A woman, somewhere in her later years, standing before a faded red barn. Silver hair pulled back tight. Boots and a flannel shirt. The kind of squint a face earns from years of looking out into open distance. The woman in the photo was smiling, not for the camera, for something just beyond it. And her jaw. The girl lifted her cold fingers to her own face, The woman's jaw was the very shape of hers. Down the block, a bus hissed to a stop, its windows glowing yellow against the wet street. The doors folded open. Somewhere inside there was warmth, and a seat, and a road leading away from everything she had ever known. She ran. Her shoes slapped through the puddles. Her breath came ragged. The box pressed hard against her chest, and she reached the doors just as they began to fold shut. She slammed her palm against the cold metal side. "Where you headed?" the driver asked. She named the town from the bottom of the letter. He frowned. "That's a ways out. Edge of nowhere, near about. Closest I get you is the crossroads. You'll have to make your own way from there." "That'll do," she said. She sank into a worn seat near the back. The bus pulled away, and the gray city slid past the window. The wet streets, the sleeping buildings, the only world that had ever been handed to her. She read the letter again, and then again. "You are not a mistake." That one line, more than all the rest, had hooked itself somewhere deep beneath her ribs, and would not let go. She had spent her whole life believing the opposite, that she was a thing left behind, a girl set down and forgotten, the way a person forgets an umbrella on a clear day. But here was a woman, gone now, gone before they ever met, who had written her name with care, who had said she belonged, who had waited, year after quiet year, for a knock that never came. The bus rolled on, out past the edge of the city, where the buildings thinned and then gave up altogether, and surrendered the land back to itself. And the girl watched the world change shape outside her window. The ground flattened, then rose again in long, slow folds. The gray of the city gave way to stretches of pale gold and stubborn green. The clouds broke apart somewhere far ahead, and a thin ribbon of light spilled across the distance like something poured. She had never seen so much of nothing in her life. It frightened her a little. All that openness, all that room, and it pulled at her too, in a way she had no words for, as though the land out there knew something about her that she had not yet been told. She must have slept somewhere in the long hours, because the next time she opened her eyes, the rain was gone and the sun had climbed up over the far hills, laying down long bands of gold across the earth. Her neck ached. Her shoes were still damp at the toes. The bus slowed at a near-empty lot where two roads crossed in the middle of all that open country, and the driver called back over his shoulder. "This is it," he said. "Last I can take you." She gathered her things, the sagging box, the envelope, the photograph she now held like it might blow away. The air outside smelled of dust and sage and something faintly sweet she couldn't place. Wood smoke, maybe, from a fire someone had lit miles off. This was not the city. This was not any place she had ever been. A truck idled near a leaning fence at the far end of the lot. A man leaned against the door of it, hat low, a thermos cradled in one hand. He looked up as she came near, studied her the way a person studies a face that reminds them of someone they used to know. "Cassie," he said. She stopped short. "Yeah." "Walter," he said and offered his hand. "Your grandmother's lawyer. Had a feeling you'd come quick." She shook it. His hand was dry and rough and steady, mid-50s, maybe older, with skin weathered by years of open sky and eyes that didn't waste themselves on small talk. "Climb in," he said. "I'll carry you the rest of the way." She set the box in the truck bed and got in beside him. The cab smelled of leather and old coffee. A pair of dusty boots sat behind the seat, next to a rolled blanket and a flashlight that had clearly seen its share of long nights. He pulled the truck onto a long, empty road, and for a while neither of them said a word. The land opened around them like the pages of a book no one had cracked in years. Low hills the color of rust and ash, scattered pines clinging to the slopes. Now and again, a lone fence post, a leaning mailbox, a windmill turning slow against the pale sky. "Knew her a good while," Walter said at last. "Your grandmother, Nell." The girl kept her eyes on the window. She wasn't one for many words, he went on, but the ones she used, she meant. Wrote out everything herself, longhand. Made me promise to hold these letters until the day you came of age, or walked out of that place on your own 2 feet, whichever came first. The girl turned the photograph over in her lap. Did she stopped, tried again. Did she ever talk about me? Walter's hands shifted on the wheel. Near the end, he said, she didn't talk about much else. The girl looked down at the silver-haired woman who had her jaw. She never met me, she said. It came out flat, a fact laid down like a stone, a wall set between herself and the hope of it. No, Walter said, but that never seemed to matter to her. She had a way of loving folks from a distance. Anyone in that town will tell you. By the end, there wasn't a soul for miles who didn't owe Nell Bennett something. The girl turned to look at him. What do you mean? The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. You'll see, he said. Soon enough. The road narrowed and dropped through a shallow valley where a line of bare cottonwoods traced the edge of a dry creek bed. The truck dipped, bounced once, climbed again. And then a weathered sign rose up at the side of the road, its paint long since faded by the sun. The name of the town. A handful of low buildings lined a single street. A post office, a small general store, a diner with half its sign gone dark. An old dog lay sleeping in a patch of sun outside the gas station, one ear twitching at a fly that wouldn't quit. The whole place looked like it had paused mid-breath and was waiting, politely, for someone to start it back up again. Walter's office was a small adobe building at the end of the street, green trim cracked along the grain. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of dry paper and cedar. A woman at a desk offered the girl a glass of water. She shook her head. Walter led her into a back room and shut the door. From a cabinet, he drew a thick folder and laid it on the desk between them. This is all of it, he said. The house, the land, the deed. It's been put over into your name. The girl stared at the folder as if it might vanish should she dare to blink. It's really mine? All of it, he said. The house needs work. The barn needs more. But the bones are good. She kept it up the best she could, even after her health started slipping out from under her. He slid something across the desk toward her. A key. Old brass, gone soft and dark at the edges. A small paper tag hung from it. The words written in that same careful hand. The Bennett place. The girl picked it up. It was warm. From the window light, maybe. Or maybe just warm from having been held so long, so often, by a woman who was no longer there to hold it. The door opened then, without a knock, and a woman came in like she'd walked through that door 1,000 times before. Round-shouldered, silver-braided, wrapped in a thick wool sweater despite the warmth of the morning. She carried a covered dish in both hands and the easy air of someone who had stopped asking permission a long time ago. "So," she said, looking the girl over from boots to brow, "you came." The girl said nothing. "I'm Bertie," the woman said. "Friend of your grandmother's. We used to quilt together, back when our hands still let us." She set the dish on the desk like she owned the room. "Brought you something warm. Figured nobody fed you proper on your way out the door." The girl looked at the dish, then at the woman, and felt something loosen and tighten in her chest at the very same moment. "You knew her," she said. "Better than most," said Bertie. "Knew your name too. Knew the month you were born. She kept a whole shelf in her mind set aside just for you, even with the two of you never once standing in the same room." The girl swallowed. "She didn't know me." Bertie's eyes softened, but she didn't argue the point. "She knew enough," she said. "She knew the things that mattered." Walter cleared his throat and nodded toward the window, toward the long road that ran out of town. "Your grandmother did right by the folks around here," he said. "When the family on the East Road lost their roof in a storm, she paid for the lumber and never said a word about it. When old Tom couldn't make his feed payment 3 winters running, she covered it and called it a loan she had no intention of collecting. Half this town ate through one hard year or another on account of that woman," Bertie added. "She gave quiet, the best kind, the kind that doesn't stand around waiting to be thanked." The girl looked between the two of them. She had spent her whole life among people who counted every kindness like coins in a tin. People who kept ledgers in their hearts and remembered every debt. And here were 2 strangers, telling her she had come from someone who gave her kindness away like she had more than enough to spare. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Bertie lifted the dish again and pressed it gently into the girl's hands, warm through the foil. "Because one day," she said, "you might need to remember what kind of blood you carry." The drive out to the place took the better part of 20 minutes. They left the pavement behind almost at once, and the truck bounced along a dirt track that wound through high brush and pale grass. Jackrabbits broke from the sage. A hawk turned slow circles overhead, dragging its shadow over the ground like the slow hand of a clock. And then the house came into view. It sat upon a low rise, surrounded by land that stretched away in every direction, an ocean of dust and stubborn green that ran clear to the foot of the hills. The house was small, square, sun-bleached walls and a faded red roof. The windows shuttered, the porch steps leaning just a little, the way old shoulders lean after a lifetime of carrying. And beyond it stood the barn, tall and weathered red, its great doors held shut with a heavy beam. The very same barn from the photograph still clutched in her hand. The girl stepped down from the truck. The quiet out here was a different kind of quiet, not the absence of sound, the presence of something. Wind moving through the grass, the far hum of insects, her own breath suddenly loud inside her ears. She walked toward the porch, boots crunching over the gravel, dust rising soft with every step. Walter stayed back by the truck. He did not follow. She stopped at the foot of the steps, one hand resting on the rail. The wood was splintered, but solid beneath her palm. She looked out at the land, at the wide stretch of nothing and everything all at once. And for the first time in her life, she felt still, Not safe, not calm, not quite either of those things, but rooted, as though some part of her that had been drifting loose for 19 long years had finally, somehow, touched ground. She climbed the steps and pushed the door open. It gave with a low groan, and the air that breathed out was thick with dust and wood and the faintest ghost of something floral. Lavender, maybe, or dried sage hung in a corner and long forgotten. The girl stepped inside, and the floor beneath her feet did not creak like it was breaking under her weight. It creaked like it had just remembered her name. She stood there in the doorway a long while, letting her eyes find the shapes in the dim. A couch with a faded quilt folded over the back. A small table worn smooth at one corner. A row of cups in the cupboard, one of them chipped. A window above the sink, where the morning light pulled gold on the floorboards. Someone had lived a whole life inside these walls. Someone had hoped inside them, and the house had been waiting, breath held, year after year, for the one person who never came through the door. Until now. She set the box down, set the warm dish beside it, and she pressed her palm flat against the wall, the way she had once pressed it against the painted door of a family that led nowhere at all. Only this wall was real. This door had opened. She might have stood there until nightfall, lost somewhere between grief and a feeling she had no name for. A feeling that sat very close to home. If Walter hadn't come up the porch steps behind her, his boots heavy on the old wood, he stopped in the doorway, hat held in both hands. "There's something you ought to know," he said, "and I'd rather you heard it from me than stumbled on it in some letter." The girl turned. Something in his face had shifted. The kindness was still there, but behind it now was the careful look of a man about to set down a weight he had been quietly carrying for some time. "The land's yours, free and clear," he said, "but it doesn't come clean." "What does that mean?" "Your grandmother fell behind," he said, "these last few years. Her health took most of what she had to give. The taxes owed on this place. They've gone unpaid a good while now." The girl's stomach drew tight. "How much?" he told her. It was more money than she had ever held in her hands, more than she could begin to imagine holding. A number that turned the warm gold of the room a few shades colder. "There's time," he said quickly, "but not a great deal of it. A few months, give or take. After that, the place goes up for sale to settle what's owed, and whoever wants it most walks away with it." The girl looked down at the brass key, still warm in her palm. "Who wants it?" Walter was quiet for a moment. "There's a man," he said. "Garrett. Owns the spread next over. Big operation. Good with money, and better at waiting on it. He's had his eye on this land for years. Made your grandmother offers more than once. She turned down every last one of them, right up to the end. Why? Because this place was never about the dirt to her," Walter said. "It was about who she was leaving it to." He settled his hat back on his head and stepped toward the door. "He'll come around," he added. "Garrett will, sooner than you'd care for. He'll be friendly about it, too. He'll tell you it's too much for a girl your age, too much work, too much owed. He'll offer to take it off your hands, and he'll make it sound like he's doing you a favor." He paused on the threshold. "He won't be wrong about the work," Walter said. It's more than two strong hands could manage, let alone one. I won't sit here and tell you staying is the wise thing. I won't tell you it isn't a mountain in front of you." He looked back at her, and his voice gentled. "But I knew your grandmother the better part of 30 years, and the only thing she ever asked of me was to put this key in your hand and let you decide the rest for yourself." He stepped out onto the porch. "Take your time," he said. "A few days anyhow. That's about all the time we've got." And then he was gone. Down the steps and into the truck, the engine turning over, the dust rising soft behind him as he pulled away down the long dirt track and shrank into the distance. The girl stood alone in the doorway of a house she had owned for less than an hour. The land stretched out before her, golden and endless beneath the climbing sun. Somewhere past the barn, a windmill creaked and turned. The hawk was up there still, riding the warm air in slow, patient circles, in no hurry to be anywhere at all. She thought about the bus, about how easy it would be to walk back out to the road and lift her thumb and let the open country carry her off somewhere else, the same way it had carried her here. A girl with nothing to lose had nothing to lose by leaving. But she wasn't quite that girl anymore, because somewhere in the last few hours, between a letter read in the rain and a key gone warm in her hand, and two strangers telling her what kind of blood she carried, she had been handed something, a name, a place, a woman who had waited, and a debt that could take it all away before she ever learned to hold it. She looked down at the key, then out toward the barn, where the great red doors stood shut against the light, holding their secrets close, the way the whole of this place seemed to hold its own. She didn't know the first thing about land, or cattle, or fences, or fixing a roof, or paying down a mountain of debt with two empty hands. She didn't know how to rebuild a single broken thing. But the letter had said she was not a mistake, and for the first time in 19 years. She wanted to find out whether that might be true. The girl stepped back inside, out of the wide gold morning, and drew the door shut behind her, not to keep the world out, but to hold this one small thing in, this house, this land, this chance someone had left her, wrapped in careful handwriting and a tarnished brass key. Outside, the wind moved through the grass in long, slow waves, patient, unhurried, like a thing that had waited a long time, and could wait a little longer still. It had waited for her. The first night in the house was colder than the girl had bargained for. The wind came down off the open country after dark, slipping through the cracks in the window frames, coiling around her ankles as she moved from room to room with a stub of candle she'd found in a kitchen drawer. She had swept out the front room that afternoon, beaten the dust from a faded quilt until her arms ached, stacked two cushions on the old couch, and told herself it was a bed. But sleep didn't come. The quiet was too loud. She lay there a long while, listening to a house that wasn't silent at all. The tick of something settling deep in the walls, the low complaint of the roof leaning into the wind, the faint creak of a place breathing in its sleep, the way old houses do. And underneath all of it, the strange, impossible weight of a single thought, that she was lying inside walls a woman had built her whole life around, a grandmother she never got to meet, a grandmother who, by every account she'd been given, had been waiting on her clear up to the end. The girl turned that over and over in the dark until the candle guttered low and the cold finally pressed her down into a shallow, restless sleep. Morning came gray and gold at the same time. The sun rose slow over the far hills, and the light crept across the floorboards like it was searching for something it had set down years ago and never found again. The girl woke stiff and sore, every muscle complaining. She rose and she wrapped herself in a denim jacket that hung on a peg by the door. A jacket far too wide in the shoulders. Clearly the old woman's. The sleeves swallowed her hands clean to the fingertips, but it smelled faintly of lavender and dust and sun-warmed cotton, and somehow that made it easier to slip her arms inside. She made coffee in a chipped enamel pot, drank it black, standing at the window above the sink, watching the land go from shadow to color as the morning climbed. Out past the glass, the world stretched on without end. Pale grass bending in the wind. The barn standing red and patient against the brightening sky. A windmill turning slow, with nobody there to ask it to. The girl had spent her whole life inside walls and fences and rules, rooms with numbers on the doors, schedules pinned to corkboards. She had never once owned a view. She finished her coffee, set the cup in the sink, and then she went out to face the work. The fence was the first thing she put her hands on. It ran out behind the house, half collapsed. A broken spine of split boards and leaning posts, dangling rusted nails like crooked teeth across the dry ground. She hadn't planned to fix it, not today. But there was something restless in her that morning. Something that needed to do a thing that didn't ask to be understood. A thing that asked only to be done. The house was too full of memory. The box still sat heavy in her mind, though she hadn't yet found it. The letters her grandmother had written and the silence she'd written them into. It all pressed close, like the walls had soaked up too much waiting over the years and couldn't hold any more. So she came outside, where the sky was big enough to let a person breathe. She pulled her sleeves down over her hands, bent into the tall grass, and started dragging away the broken pieces. Old wire gone brittle and orange with rust, snapped boards riddled with rot. A horseshoe tangled deep in the weeds, half swallowed by the earth. The air was dry enough to scratch at her throat. The sun climbed higher. Sweat gathered at the back of her neck and ran cold down her spine. And she had no earthly idea what she was doing. You planning to wrestle that whole fence down by yourself? The voice came out of the quiet like a clean cut through cloth. The girl jerked upright so fast she nearly went over backward into the grass. A man stood maybe 10 yards off on the far side of the broken fence line, broad through the shoulders, worn jeans, a ball cap pulled low against the morning glare. His stance was easy, too easy, for someone who had appeared out of open country with no sound at all. "Who are you?" she asked, too startled to come out anything but sharp. "Cole," he said, and took a slow step closer. "Cole Bishop. Bertie said you might be needing a hand out here. I used to patch this place up, back when your grandmother's back started giving out on her." The girl brushed her palms against her jeans and looked him over. He didn't carry himself like a threat, but he didn't look the least bit impressed either. "She didn't say you'd be coming," the girl said. "Didn't say it to me, neither," he answered. "I was in town for hardware. Figured I'd swing by and see how you were settling. Looked to me like you were losing a fight with that fence." I'm not losing, she muttered. He raised one eyebrow, nodded at the board still clutched in her hands. That one's eaten through with rot, he said. And the post you've nailed it to isn't anchored to a thing in this world. You're fighting a ghost, and the ghost is winning. The girl let out a long breath. Then, after a moment, a reluctant shrug. I'm new to all this, she admitted. Figured that too. He stepped over the low stretch of fencing and walked toward her like the land already knew the weight of his boots. Up close, he was younger than she'd guessed from the voice. A scar rode the corner of his jaw, pale against sun-browned skin. The kind of scar a man doesn't explain unless somebody asks him twice. His hands were rough and sure, the hands of someone who'd never once made a living sitting down. He didn't waste time, and he didn't make small talk. He showed her how to test a post by rocking it gently at the base, how to listen for the hollow, dead sound that meant the wood had gone soft somewhere inside where the eye couldn't see. He moved like the tools were an extension of his own hands, like the work was a language he'd been speaking since before he could walk. They labored a while in a silence that wasn't quite easy, just unfamiliar to them both. She was tough, Cole said after a stretch. Your grandmother. You've likely figured that much by now. I'm starting to. She let me fix a lot of things around here over the years, he went on, driving a nail home with 2 clean strikes. The roof, the pump, most of this fence more than once. But there was one part of that barn she'd never let a soul touch. The far stall, back corner. Said that space was hers, and hers alone. The girl looked up from the nail she'd been fighting. She didn't say anything, but she filed the words away, careful as a person folding a map. The far stall, the back corner. And somewhere underneath the ache in her arms, something in her had already decided where she'd be going the moment the sun went down. They worked until the heat got high and the shadows pulled in close to the posts. Cole leaned a few panels of fresh fencing against the side of the house and said he'd come back the next day with proper tools. I didn't ask you to, the girl said. I know, he said. He tipped his cap back, and his face came clearer in the light. Tired and kind, both at the same time, in a way she wasn't used to seeing on the same face. But your grandmother helped folks when she had no reason to, he said. Out here, that kind of thing earns something. Takes a while to pay back. Some of us are still working on it. He climbed into his truck and pulled away, folding into the wide country like he'd always been a part of it. The girls stood a long while, looking at the work they'd done together. A few of the boards stood straight now. The posts no longer leaned like questions waiting on an answer. It wasn't finished, not close. But for the first time that she could remember, the ache in her arms didn't feel like a thing that was breaking her down. It felt like proof that she was here. She waited until the house had gone dark and quiet, until the wind picked back up and started its low humming through the rafters again. Then she lit the candle and she began to look. The front rooms gave up nothing. A drawer of mismatched buttons, a shelf of seed catalogs gone soft and curled with age, a calendar 3 seasons out of date, the days crossed off in a careful pencil hand, right up until they simply stopped. That stopping place, that last little mark on the last counted day. It sat in the girl's chest like a stone dropped into still water. At the end of the hall was a door she hadn't yet opened, the only one in the house with a lock. She tried the knob. It turned with a reluctant click. The room beyond smelled different, warmer, fuller. lived in a way the rest of the house had let go of. The bed was neatly made, the quilt smoothed flat, as though a woman had risen one ordinary morning fully expecting to come home that night and turn it down again. A scarf hung on a peg by the window, worn soft as river stone. Photographs stood in a row along the dresser. Old ones, most of them. A young girl beside a horse. A woman with braids and a faint, private smile she seemed to be keeping for herself. A younger Nell before the silver came in, squinting in the sun in front of the same barn that now leaned out back beneath the stars. But it was the corner of the room that pulled at the girl. A small bookshelf, half hidden behind a coat rack, and beside it, low to the floor, a cedar chest with rusted hinges. She knelt, brushed her fingers across the worn lid. It lifted with a soft groan, like the room itself had sighed. Inside, among folded blankets and yellowed papers, lay a photograph. A young woman with dark eyes and a messy ponytail, holding a baby wrapped in a pale blanket. The young woman's face was both worn through and stubborn, not joyful, not quite, but fierce. Afraid, maybe. Brave in a way that hurt to look at straight on. Someone had written on the back, in faded ink, "Della and the baby, 4 days." The girl stopped breathing. She had never once seen her mother's face, not clearly, not whole, not like this. She sank back on her heels, and the weight of it landed on her all at once. A mother, with a name, with a face that had looked down at her, just once, when she was 4 small days into the world. She closed the lid, stood too fast, the blood rushing in her ears. The candle flame trembled with the shaking of her hand, and then she went out the back door, into the dark. The barn rose ahead of her, half lost in shadow, its roofline cut sharp and black against a sky thick with stars. She didn't take the candle. The moon was bright enough to walk by, and somehow she knew, deep down, that whatever waited for her out there had no intention of hiding. The great doors gave way with a low groan, the heavy crossbeam scraping loose in her hands. The smell met her first. Old hay, aged wood, something earthy and animal that had soaked deep into the beams over long, slow years. Shafts of silver moonlight fell through the gaps in the roof, cutting clean across the dust that hung in the air like slow, drifting snow. The space was wide, hollow, the skeleton of something that had once been full of breath and motion and life. She moved past the empty stalls toward the back corner, the one Cole had spoken of, the one Nell had kept for herself, and herself alone. A row of feed bins stood there, cracked and leaning, draped heavy with cobwebs. The girl pushed them aside with effort, the old wood groaning and complaining beneath her palms. The floor underneath looked the same as everywhere else in the barn, but when she pressed down near the center, one board dipped. She crouched, worked her fingers into the seam at the edge. It resisted her, then lifted with a splintering pop that echoed in the empty dark. Below was a small hollow, maybe 2 feet deep, and inside it sat a metal box, green, dented, scarred all over, like something that had survived far more years than it had any right to, and held its shape through every one of them. The girl drew it out into the moonlight. The latch stuck, then gave. The lid opened with a soft scrape, and the first thing she saw was letters, a whole bundle of them, tied tight with twine, yellowed envelopes addressed in that same careful hand to a name she now knew, Della, sent to one place, then crossed out and sent to another, then another still. Every one of them unopened. Every one of them returned. The girl's breath caught hard in her throat. Beneath the letters lay a small wooden box, lined with worn velvet gone shiny at the corners. She opened it to find a plain gold ring and a little silver locket. Inside the locket, 2 photographs, a young Nell, grinning wide, her hair tossed by wind, and a small child with deep, serious eyes that looked back at the girl across all the years, achingly, impossibly familiar. And at the very bottom of the box, a notebook. She lifted it out with both hands. The way a person lifts a thing they already know somehow is going to change them. She opened the cover, a ranch journal. The early pages were neat and plain. Counts of cattle, notes on the rain, records of what needed mending and when. But then the entries shifted. Della didn't come home again last night. We argued. She says I don't understand her. Maybe I don't. I only know what it takes to keep a place like this alive. I wish she'd let me in. Just once. The girl turned the page. A worker came out today. Said there's a baby. A little girl, only days old. My granddaughter. They tell me I'm not fit to take her. Too old. Too far out. Too alone. I don't care one bit what they say. She's mine. And I will wait for her. The girl's hands had started to tremble. She turned the pages faster now, the moonlight pale across the ink, her eyes moving down through the years like a person climbing down into a deep, quiet well. A picture came in the post today. She's 7, missing a tooth right in the front. I pinned it to the wall where the morning light hits first. She's got Della's laugh in her, I'd swear it. That same crooked smile. They won't let me write to her direct. Say it might confuse the child. So I send the pictures along instead. The little updates. I ask them, please, to pass on what they can. I don't know if a single one ever reached her. But I keep writing. I keep saving. I keep her face on the wall. She's near grown now. I hope she's all right. Wherever she is. I hope she knows she belongs somewhere. Even if it's only in the stubborn prayers of an old woman she's never once laid eyes on. The girl closed the notebook with shaking fingers. She had spent her whole life believing she came from nothing. That she was a girl set down in a system and forgotten. A blank space where other people carried a story. But here in the cold dark of the barn, under the silver fall of moonlight, was proof. Ink on a page, dust in the air, faded fingerprints worn into the corners of old photographs, proof that someone had wanted her, proof that someone had waited. Year after quiet year, pinning a stranger's face to a wall where the first light came, and talking to it like a prayer. The girl didn't cry. Not at first. She just sat there on the cold barn floor, a long, long while, the box open in front of her, the little silver locket clutched tight in one hand until the edges pressed marks into her palm. And when the tears finally did come, they weren't only grief. They were something older than grief, something deeper, as though the land itself had cracked open inside her chest and let in everything she had never once allowed herself to hope for. When the wind moved through the rafters high above her, it didn't howl. It hummed, like a welcome, like a breath held far too long, at last let go. She carried the box back to the house, slow and careful, the way a person carries something that might break the air around it if handled wrong. There was more inside than letters and a notebook. Down at the very bottom, beneath everything else, she found a small cassette player, the old kind, with worn buttons and a cracked plastic handle, and taped to the front of it, a note in that same clear, careful hand. "She used to sing to you. Play this when you're ready." The girl set it on the kitchen table and stared at it a long time. She wasn't ready. She knew that much for certain. But she also knew, somewhere down deep, that ready was a thing that never truly arrived. A person just reached the place where the waiting hurt worse than the knowing ever could. She pressed the button, a hiss of static, and then a voice, fragile, a little off-key, but soft and sweet, and so young it made the girl's chest pull tight around her heart. A lullaby, an old one, the kind women had hummed over cradles long before either of these two had ever drawn breath. The girl sat down hard in the chair. It wasn't a fine recording. The sound warped and frayed at the edges, thinned out by all the years it had waited in the dark. But it was her mother, younger, raw, singing over a child she hadn't been ready for, but had held close anyway, if only for a handful of days. The girl let the song play all the way through, her fingers gripping the table's edge so hard the knuckles went white. When it ended, the silence rushed back in to fill the room. She didn't cry. Not yet. The tears were there, patient behind her eyes. But she had something to hold now, and she wasn't ready to set it down. She reached for the bundle of returned letters and worked the twine loose. Most of them were her grandmother's. Words sent out into the wide world, year after year, that had come back unopened and refused. A woman writing into a long silence, and never once letting that silence stop her hand. But near the bottom of the bundle was a newer envelope, thicker than the rest, and this one had been opened. Inside was a single page, the handwriting different, messier, the hand of a younger woman, or a shaking one. The girl read it slow. "I never answered your last letter. I didn't know how. Most days, I still don't. But I'm not gone. Not the way you might be thinking. I found my footing somewhere along the way. I'm doing better now. Working with my hands. Working with growing things. It suits me more than anything ever has. I think about her every day. The girl. I think about you too, more than you'd believe. If she ever finds her way back to you, please tell her I'm sorry. For all of it." There was a name signed at the bottom. Della. The girl read it again. Slower this time. The room had gone very still around her. Her mother had not died. Her mother had not vanished into nothing, the way the girl had quietly assumed her whole life, the way she'd let herself believe because believing it hurt a little less than the alternative. Her mother had set her down out of fear, and out of a love that came out crooked, and out of a weight too heavy for one young woman to carry alone. And then her mother had gone on living. Somewhere out there, under the same wide sky, working with her hands, growing things. The girl pressed the page flat against the table and stared at it until the words began to swim and blur together. Alive. The whole world tilted, just slightly, on that single word. The knock at the door came the next morning, just past dawn. 3 slow raps. Firm, unhurried. The girl wasn't expecting a soul. She opened the door halfway, the old habit of caution still pulled tight in her chest. A man stood on the porch, older, well-dressed in a way that felt deliberate out here in the open country. A pressed shirt, clean boots that had plainly never broken a sweat in the dirt, a smile that arrived a half second before it ever reached his eyes. "Morning," he said. You'd be Nell's girl, the one come all this way to take over the place. And you'd be Garrett, she said. His smile widened a notch. Walter's been talking, I see. Good man, Walter. Honest to a fault. He looked past her shoulder into the dim of the house, the way a man looks at a thing he's already decided he means to own. Came to pay my respects, he said, and to put an offer in front of you, while there's still time to make it an easy one. The girl didn't open the door any wider. This place was something once, Garrett went on, gazing out across the land with the look of a man appraising a horse. Your grandmother held on to it longer than men half her age could have managed, but that holding on near broke her right in two. You've seen the books by now. You know what I'm telling you is true. He let the silence do some of the work. He was good at that. Patient men usually are. It's a hard life out here, he said. Harder than it ever looks from a porch in the morning, and it doesn't get one bit softer for a girl on her own. A mountain of debt at her back, and not a soul in the world to lean on. He named a number then, an offer. It was generous on its face. More than the place was worth, maybe, counted in dollars alone. You take that, he said, and you walk away clean. No debt, no worry. A little something in your pocket to start fresh, somewhere a good deal kinder than this. Nobody'd think less of you for it. Nobody could. The girl looked at him a long, level moment. She thought of the box in the barn, the notebook full of a woman's waiting, the lullaby thinned by years, the face of a mother she had never seen, who was out there still, breathing, still growing things with her hands. She thought of a wall where the morning light came first, and a child's photograph pinned to it, season after season, by an old woman talking to it like a prayer. This place wasn't about the money to her, the girl said. It was about who she was leaving it to. Garrett's smile didn't slip, but something behind it went cool and flat. That's a sweet thought, he said. Sentiment's a fine thing in its place, but sentiment doesn't pay what's owed. And it sure doesn't keep a roof from caving in the first hard season that comes through here. He stepped back off the porch, settling his hat down low. The offer stands, he said, for now. But debt's got a clock on it, girl. And clocks don't care a thing for sentiment either. You think on it. You'll come around in time. They always do. He walked back to a truck far too clean for these dusty roads, and he drove off slow, in no hurry whatsoever, because men like Garrett never needed to hurry. Time, the way he saw it, was already working for him. The girl stood in the doorway a long while after the dust had drifted back down to the earth. His words had been built to frighten her, and in some small corner of her, they had landed exactly as he'd meant them to. Too much work, too much debt, a girl on her own. She knew those words. She'd heard them, in one shape or another, her whole life long. Too much, too hard, not enough, better off without. But standing there, with the morning light pooling gold on the floorboards behind her, she found that, for once, she didn't believe them, because the woman who had owned this land before her had been called all the same things: too old, too far out, too alone. And that woman had waited a whole lifetime anyway, had loved a stranger from a distance, across all the miles and all the closed doors, and had never once let the world talk her out of it. The girl turned back inside. On the table sat the cassette, the bundle of returned letters, the single newer page signed in a hand that shook. She picked up that page again and read the last lines one more time. If she ever finds her way back to you, tell her I'm sorry for all of it. The girl set it down. Her jaw had taken on a certain set, the very same set, though she had no way of knowing it, that the woman in the photograph wore standing in front of the old red barn. She had come to this place believing she had no past worth the knowing. Now she had two women's whole lives laid out before her on a kitchen table. One who had waited for her until her final breath and pinned her face to a wall to keep her close, and one who was still out there somewhere, still living, still sorry, still growing things with her hands beneath the same wide sky. The girl looked out the window toward the long road that ran away from the house and out into the open country, toward all the far places a person could be when she didn't want to be found. She didn't yet know how she would find her. She only knew with a certainty that surprised even her, that she was finished being a blank space in somebody else's story. She was going to find the truth, all of it, no matter how far the road ran, or what it would cost her to carry it once she did. Outside, the wind rose and fell across the grass, slow and steady, like the long breath of a land that had been keeping these secrets a great many years, and had only ever been waiting for someone brave enough to come out and ask. For 3 days, the letter sat on the kitchen table, and the girl could not bring herself to send it. She had written it the first night, by candlelight, after the cassette and the bundle of returned envelopes. Written it, then crossed half of it out, started over on a fresh page, crumpled that one too, and smoothed it flat again until the paper went soft as cloth between her fingers. What does a person say to a mother she has never met? How do you fold 19 years of silence into a few short lines, and then trust them to the wind to carry? In the end, she kept it plain. She wrote that she had found the ranch, that she had found the box beneath the barn floor, and the journal, and the song worn thin by years, that she knew now her mother was alive, somewhere out there, working with growing things. And then, at the very bottom, she wrote one line that nearly tore the page in two. If you ever want to come, the door is open. She didn't have an address, but Bertie did, or near enough. The old woman remembered the town from a card that had come years back, and Walter knew a man who knew a man out that way. Between the three of them, they got the letter pointed in the right direction and sent it on with a prayer behind it. And then she waited. Waiting, the girl was beginning to learn, was its own kind of labor, harder than the fence, harder than the roof. There was nothing to swing a hammer at, nothing to drag out of the weeds and set right with her hands, just the long hours, and the hope she didn't trust, and the fear that sat down right beside that hope, like an old companion who knew her too well. Some mornings she was certain the letter would never reach a single soul, that it would come back to her unopened, the way her grandmother's letters had, and she would have to learn to carry that the way the old woman had learned to. Other mornings she stood at the window over the sink and let herself imagine it anyway. A truck on the long dirt road, a figure stepping down into the dust, a face she had only ever seen in one photograph, 4 days old. She kept working because the work kept her from going under. She turned over a wide patch of hard ground behind the house and cleared it of stones, one by one, until her back ached and the pile beside her grew tall. She walked the fence line and marked every post that still leaned. She remembered to feed herself most days, and every evening, just before the dark came down, she played the lullaby once, all the way through. Not because it didn't hurt, because it did. And because some hurts, she was starting to understand, were the kind a person chose to keep close, carried on purpose, like a stone worn smooth in a pocket. On the 5th day, a truck came up the long dirt road. The girl was out by the turned earth when she heard it. The low growl of an engine, far off at first, then closer. Dust rising in a thin, pale plume against the morning sky. It wasn't Cole's truck. She knew the sound of his by now, the particular rattle of it. It wasn't Garrett's either. His was always too clean, too smooth, too quiet for these roads. This one was older. It complained as it came, and it slowed at the bend as though the driver wasn't sure of the way, or wasn't sure of the welcome waiting at the end of it. The girl set down her tools in the dirt. Her heart had already begun to pound, hard and high in her throat, before her mind had caught up enough to understand why. The truck rolled to a stop near the porch. The engine ticked, and then went still. And for a long moment, no one got out. The girl stood out in the field and watched. She didn't move closer. She didn't dare. Some part of her was afraid that if she moved, the whole thing would dissolve like morning fog, and she would wake on the couch with 2 cushions under her head and none of it true. Then the door opened. A woman stepped down, older than the photograph, of course, years older. Her dark hair shot through now with gray, pulled back loose at the neck. She wore a flannel shirt and worn boots, and she moved like a person who had spent a long, hard time learning how to stand up straight again. She didn't walk toward the house. She stopped a few feet from the truck, one hand still resting on the door, as if she might climb back inside at any second, as if the ground under her feet might decide, after all this time, not to hold her. She looked at the house, at the leaning porch, at the very spot where, a whole lifetime ago, she had set a 4-day-old child into another woman's arms, and turned and walked away into the rest of her life. And then she lifted her eyes and looked out across the field, and she saw the girl. Neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the tall grass between them, carrying dust and the faint sweetness of sage, and it seemed to the girl that the whole wide world had gone still on purpose, just to watch what these 2 would do. She started across the field, slow, one step, then another, each one carrying her closer to a face she had kept all her life in a photograph and a song, and had never once believed she would stand in front of. The woman watched her come. Her hand finally slipped from the truck door and hung loose at her side, trembling. When the girl stopped a few feet away, the woman's mouth opened, closed, opened again, and still nothing came. "You're taller," she said at last, the words barely held together, than I ever let myself imagine." The girl's throat had drawn shut so tight it hurt. "You're real," she managed, "all this time. I wasn't sure you were real." A sound escaped the woman that was almost a laugh, wet at the edges, broken in the middle. She pressed the back of one hand hard against her mouth. "I'm real," she whispered, "and I'm so sorry. I don't have the words for it. I've had years to find them. I still don't. I don't need words, the girl said. Her own voice came out steadier than she felt inside. I need the truth. The woman nodded. Her eyes were shining, the light catching in them. Then I'll give you the truth, she said, if you'll let me. It's about the only thing I have left that's worth anything at all. They sat out behind the house. On a pair of old crates the girl dragged into the shade of the eaves. There was no good place for a conversation like this one. So they made a place out of crate wood and dust and the long slant of afternoon light. Della talked, and the girl listened. She talked about being young, here, on this very land. About feeling like the walls of the world were drawing in tight around her, and no one could see it but her. She talked about the fight with her own mother, loud ones, crooked ones, two people who loved each other fierce and only ever knew how to say it as anger thrown across a room. She talked about leaving, and about the years that came after, the bad ones, the lost ones, the dark ones. A sickness she had carried for a long stretch of her life, the kind that takes the wheel of a person and drives the whole thing clear off the road. She didn't dress it up. She didn't hide behind it either. She set it down between them plain, like a thing she'd carried too long. I was drowning, she said simply, looking out at the far hills. And when you were born, I held you, and I looked at your face, and I thought, I am going to pull this child down under with me. That's what I believed, deep in my bones. That the kindest thing left in me was to let go before I took you down too. The girl's jaw tightened. You could have come back, she said. After, when you got better, you could have come back for me. I know. You knew where I was. She knew. Somebody always knew where I was. I know, Della said again, and this time her voice cracked clean through the middle like a board giving way. There's no telling of this where I get to come out clean, where I explain it just right, and you understand, and it stops being my fault. I was afraid of you, of who I had been, of driving all that way and finding out you'd built yourself a whole life that didn't have any room left in it for me. She wiped at her face with the heel of her hand. So I told myself you were better off not knowing me, she said. And I let that lie keep me away for too long, for far, far too long. There's no map back from a thing like that. A person just has to start walking and hope the road still runs both ways. The girl looked down at her own two hands, at the dirt worked into her knuckles, at the calluses that hadn't been there a few short weeks ago. She had hated this woman for the better part of her whole life, hated the empty space where a mother was supposed to stand, hated the not knowing, the way it had sat in her like a stone, hated most of all the small cold voice that had whispered to her through all the long years that maybe she simply had not been worth the staying. And now the woman was here, in the flesh, smaller than all that hatred, human-sized. I don't know what to do with you, the girl said. The plainness of it surprised even her. I hated you for a long time. I'm not going to pretend I didn't, but I don't. I don't hate you now, and I don't know what to put in the place where it used to be. Della nodded slowly. She didn't reach out. She seemed to understand that reaching out had to be earned, a little at a time. You don't have to know, she said. Not today. Maybe not for a long while yet. I didn't drive all this way to be forgiven, Cassie. I gave up any right to ask for that a long time ago." "Then why did you come?" The woman was quiet a moment. The wind turned the grass over, silver and then green again. "Because you opened the door," she said at last. "And I have spent enough years standing on the wrong side of closed ones to know exactly what it costs a person to leave one open. You did a brave thing writing that letter. The very least I had left in me was to walk through it." The light was going gold and long across the field by then, and the girl found, sitting there on a crate beside a stranger who wore her own crooked smile, that something deep in her chest had shifted, not healed, not whole, not anywhere near it, but shifted, moved somehow off a place it had been stuck for 19 years. Bertie had told her once, over tea, that forgiveness was never a debt that got paid back. It was a thing a person chose, and not always for the one who'd done the wrong. Sometimes, Bertie had said, you forgive somebody for one reason only, so that you can finally stop bleeding from it. The girl wasn't there yet. She knew that much for certain, but for the first time in her life, she could see the place. Far off, like a light in a window across the dark, where there yet might one day be. Della didn't stay long that first time. She had a life now, somewhere, with green and growing things in it that needed tending. And the girl wasn't ready to ask her to stay. And Della was wise enough, finally, not to offer before she was asked. But before she climbed back up into the rattling truck, she reached out, slow, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind the girl's ear. Her fingers were warm and shaking. "You look just like her," she said. The girl didn't ask who. She already knew. She watched the truck pull away down the long dirt road, the dust rising and settling behind it, until it was just a shape, and then only a memory, and then nothing at all but open country and a road that ran both ways. And she stood there a good long while after it was gone. Not empty, not full, just present, just here, just standing on her own land, under her own sky, with one more piece of herself returned. The trouble came the next morning, and it came from a direction the girl hadn't thought to watch. She had walked into town for fencing staples and stopped in at the small store, and there she happened to hear two men talking low near the counter, the way men talk when they don't believe a girl is paying any mind. One of them said Garrett's name, and then, a breath later, he said Cole's. The girl went very still in the aisle. She hadn't meant to listen, but the words came together the way broken pieces sometimes do, sliding into a shape she didn't want to see take form. Garrett had been paying men, quietly, for months. Men who knew the country and the families and just how to lean on a person without ever once raising a hand. And one of the names the man said, plain as day, was Cole Bishop. This girl walked the long way home in a daze, the staples forgotten in her fist, the whole bright morning gone gray and sour at the edges. She had let that man into her life, had handed him a hammer and stood beside him in the dust, and started, against every hard-learned instinct she owned, to trust him. And the whole time, he might have been Garrett's man, sent out here to soften her up, to wear her down slow, to make the selling feel, when the moment came, like it had been her own idea all along. By the time his truck rolled up that afternoon, the hurt in her had hardened into something cold and quiet and sharp. She met him out in the yard. She didn't say hello. "Were you working for Garrett?" Cole stopped halfway out of the truck The question hit him like a thrown stone, and she watched it land, watched his face shift and tighten, and what she saw move across it wasn't the clean blankness of an innocent man. It was guilt. The cold thing in her chest cracked wide open. "You were," she said. "You were, the whole time. Cassie, don't." Her voice shook on the word. "Don't you say my name like you've earned the right to." He held up both hands, slow, careful, like a man calming a spooked animal. "He came to me," Cole said. "That part's true, months back, before you ever set foot out here. Offered me good money to do exactly the thing you're thinking. Come around friendly, be useful. Talk the new owner out of staying, soft and slow, when she finally showed. And you took it. No." The word came out flat. "Final." "I let him think I might," Cole said. "I even took his first payment. I'm not going to stand here and lie to you about that, because Lord knows you've had enough people lie to your face to last you 3 lifetimes over." The girl's breath came hard and fast through her nose. "But I never once did the thing he paid me for," Cole said. "Not a single time. I drove out here that first day because Bertie asked me to, and I kept coming back day after day because of—" He stopped, looked away from her, out toward the red barn, his jaw working like he was chewing on something hard. "Because of your grandmother," he finished. The girl said nothing. She waited him out. "You want the truth?" Cole said. "All of it? A few years back, I was in a bad way. Lost the land my uncle left me, near about all of it. Lost a good deal more than land, too. There was one winter I didn't have wood split, didn't have feed in the barn, didn't have much of a reason to climb out of bed come morning." He turned back to face her square. "And Nell Bennett showed up at my door," he said. "An old woman who could barely walk by then. She didn't say a whole lot. Just left a cord of wood stacked by my porch, where I'd find it. Paid my feed bill and called it a loan she had no plan in the world to collect. Sat with me on the worst night of my life and didn't try to fix one single thing about it. Just sat. Just stayed." His voice had gone rough as gravel. "So, when Garrett came around waving his money," he said, "telling me to help him pry her land out from under some girl who'd just lost everything she had." He shook his head, slow and certain. "I took his money so he'd think I was bought and handled. And then I came out here to make good and sure he never got within a country mile of what that woman left you." The girl stared at him. The cold thing in her chest hadn't gone soft. Not all the way. But it had stopped its cracking. It had gone quiet. "You should have told me," she said. "I should have," he agreed at once. "I know it. I kept telling myself there'd come a right time for it. There never is, with a thing like that. I'm sorry, Cassie. You want to run me off this land for good. I won't say a word against it. I'd have it coming." The girl looked at him a long, long moment, at the pale scar riding the corner of his jaw, at the dust ground into his boots, at those hands that worked for a living, and had, it turned out, been working all along for her, and for the old woman who'd sat with him in the dark. She had spent her whole life with a finely tuned ear for who would let her down, for the tell, the flinch, the lie behind the eyes, and every part of that old instinct, looking at him now, had gone still and silent. "Don't take his money again," she said. That was all, but they both knew the whole of what it meant. Cole nodded once. "Already gave it back," he said. "Drove it out to his place the morning after you turned him down on your porch. Should have done it a lot sooner than that." And that was the end of it. They didn't speak of it again, not that day or after. They just got back to the work, side by side, the way two people do when the trust between them has been broken clean through and mended in the very same breath, and somehow comes out stronger, right along the seam. It was Cole who found the map. They'd been clearing out the old shed behind the barn, hauling years of forgotten things out into the light, and he came up with a flat tin box wedged behind a coil of rope gone stiff with age. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, soft as cloth, the creases worn near translucent with the years, a hand-drawn map, faded pencil lines, the shape of the whole place, sketched rough but sure, the house, the barn, the fence lines running out across it, and away past the far pasture, beneath the wide spread of a cottonwood, a small marked X. Below it, in that careful hand, the girl had come to know better than her own. Spring line. Use if the well runs dry. The girl stared down at it. The well hadn't failed. Not yet. But the water pressure had been low for weeks now. She'd half talked herself into believing it was nothing at all. Just an old place going about the business of being old. But here was her grandmother, reaching forward across all those years, leaving a thing buried in the ground for a granddaughter she would never meet, to be found on the exact day she'd need it most. "You know what this means," Cole said, low. The girl shook her head. "If there's a live spring out there," he said, "a real one, still running under all that. This land's worth twice what Garrett ever reckoned it was. Water's the whole game out here. A place with its own water never has to go begging the sky for a single thing." The girl folded the map back up with hands that had started, just slightly, to tremble. She didn't say a word, but something low in her had begun to burn. Steady. Like a coal that had waited a long while in the ash for just a little air. They went out the next morning before the heat could climb, past the mended fences, past the dark turned earth behind the house, out to the wide cottonwood at the edge of the far pasture where the grass grew taller and greener and the soil went soft and giving underfoot. The girl drove the spade hard into the ground beneath the tree. It resisted her. Then it gave. She dug, and Cole dug beside her, and the sun climbed higher, and the sweat ran down into her eyes, and her palms blistered open all over again, the way they had that very first day out on the fence line. But she did not stop. Because this wasn't Garrett's money. It wasn't a number written on a page in an office. It wasn't some man handing her an easy way out and calling it a kindness while he took what he wanted. This was hers, pulled up out of the ground with her own two hands, the very same way her grandmother had pulled a whole long life out of this same stubborn, waiting earth. For the better part of 2 hours, they dug. And then the spade struck something solid. A dull, certain thud, deep in the hole. The girl dropped to her knees in the dirt and brushed it clear with her bare fingers. A pipe. Old, but sound. Whole. Cole worked the rusted fitting loose, and for one long, terrible moment, nothing happened at all. And the girl felt her heart drop straight through the floor of her. And then the water came. Cold, clear, rising up out of the dark earth where it had been waiting all this time, patient, hidden, saved all these years for exactly this. The girl sat back on her heels in the mud, breathing hard, and she laughed, short, startled, wholly, achingly alive. She had found something her grandmother left for her. Not money, not an easy way out of the hole, a way through it. But water rising in the ground was a promise. It was not a payment, and the clock Garrett had spoken of, that first cool morning on the porch, kept right on ticking toward its hour. The day the debt came due, the sky was clear and high and wide and altogether indifferent to it all. The girl had done the one thing she truly knew how to do. She had worked. She had planted that first turned patch and tended it like her whole life hung on it, because in a real way, it did. Lettuce and beans and squash, coaxed up green out of the ground and watered now from a spring that asked nothing of the clouds. The first harvest wasn't much, by the measure of a working ranch, but it was real, and it was hers. And the word had gone around, the way word does in a small and quiet place, that Nell Bennett's granddaughter had raised a dead spring back to life with her own hands, and was growing food on land that the whole county had long since written off for good. She sold what she could at the farm exchange in town, stood behind a folding table in her grandmother's denim jacket with her blistered hands folded on the wood, and let the money add up, slow, a few dollars at a time. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough, even as she stacked it and counted it twice. Not nearly enough for the mountain Garrett had been so certain would bury her whole. And then the people started coming. It began with Bertie, who pressed a folded envelope flat into the girl's hand across the table and closed the girl's fingers over it, and would not take it back for anything. "For the lumber," she said, "all those years ago. The roof, after the storm. We never did pay your grandmother back proper for it. So you consider that settled now, you hear me." Then it was old Tom, who ran the exchange, waving off the girl's protest with one weathered, knotted hand. "3 winters of feed, that woman covered for me," he said gruffly, not quite meeting her eyes. "Always meant to make it right with Nell while she was living. Never quite managed it. Reckon this here's how a man does it after." Then the family from the East Road came. Then a man the girl had never once laid eyes on, who said only, quietly, that his daughter had taken sick one bad year, and Nell had driven her through the night to where she needed to go, and never breathed a word of it to a single soul afterward. One by one, quiet, the very way her grandmother had given it. A whole town come to pay back a long, slow debt of kindness that the old woman had never once in all her years asked a one of them to repay. The girl stood behind that folding table, the envelopes gathering in the deep pockets of her grandmother's jacket, and she found she could not speak at all, because this was the thing Garrett had never understood, the thing that no man like him could ever put a number on. Nell Bennett had not spent her life holding on to a worn-out piece of dirt. She had been planting something all those long years, in the people, all around her. Quiet seeds, dropped in soft, and never spoken of. And now, on the very day her girl needed it most, the whole field of it came up at once, green and golden, and impossible to deny. The girl walked into Walter's office that afternoon with the money in a worn canvas bag. She set it down on the desk, all of it. the harvest money and the envelopes, and every last dollar she'd scraped and saved. Walter counted it twice, slow, his weathered face giving away nothing at all. When he finished, he looked up at her, and something moved behind his eyes that she had not seen there before, something that looked a great deal like wonder. "It's enough," he said quietly. "It's enough, Cassie. The place is clear. Free and clear. Yours." The girl let out a breath she felt as though she'd been holding since the gray morning a tired man handed her a letter in the rain. She had kept the land, not with a miracle, not with money fallen out of the sky into her lap, but with her own 2 blistered hands, and the long, patient, quiet kindness of a woman who had spent her whole life getting ready to give her granddaughter, at last, a place to stand. A few days on, Garrett's clean truck came up the long drive one last time. He didn't get out. He sat a long moment behind the wheel, looking at the green coming up where there'd been only dust, at the water glinting silver in the new line, at a place that had been all but dead the last time he'd laid eyes on it, and wasn't dead anymore. The girl came out onto the porch and met his gaze across the yard. She didn't say a single word. She didn't need to. For a long beat, the two of them only looked at each other. And then Garrett touched the brim of his hat, not in friendliness, in the way one man tips it to another who has beaten him fair, and knows it. He turned the truck around in the dust, and he drove off slow, down the long road, and he never made another offer again. The girl stood on her porch and watched him go until the dust had settled and the quiet came back. And somewhere out past the hills, on land that was hers now, free and clear and watered from below, the spring rose up cold and clean from the dark and waiting earth, and the new grass drank deep of it. For the first time, the land did not look like something barely holding on. It looked like something that had finally been given a reason to keep going. The seasons turned, the way they do out in the open country, slow, and then all at once. The grass that had stood brittle and gold the morning the girl first set foot on that porch went green at its roots, then taller, then thick enough to lie down in waves when the wind came sweeping down off the hills. The garden behind the house, that first stubborn patch of turned earth she'd cleared of stones with her bare hands, grew into something a person could stand back and be proud of. Rows of lettuce shimmering with the morning dew, squash leaves reaching wide and open, hungry for every hour of light. Beans climbing the strings she'd strung between 2 posts, just the way her grandmother's old notebook had promised her they would, in that careful pencil hand. And the water from the spring ran steady, cold and clear and faithful as a heartbeat. It moved through the irrigation line she had dug and laid herself, out to the thirsty roots of every living thing she'd put into the ground. A place with its own water, Cole had told her once, never has to go begging the sky for anything. She thought of those words often now, standing at the edge of her own field in the thin gold light of early morning. A place that didn't have to beg. She was learning, slow and sure, to become such a place herself. The work never ended. That much was simply true, and she'd stopped pretending otherwise. There was always a fence to mend, a board gone soft underfoot, a creature to feed before the sun was full up, some small thing to fix that had been whole the day before and broken sometime in the dark of the night. But the work had stopped feeling like a weight she was pinned beneath. Somewhere along the way, without her ever quite noticing the moment it happened, it had become a life. She rose before the sun most mornings and pulled on the denim jacket that no longer felt too wide across the shoulders. She fed the 2 goats Bertie had helped her bring home in the back of a borrowed trailer. She scattered grain for the handful of hens that had taken to trailing her around the yard like she was the one who belonged to them, and not the other way around. There was an old bay horse in the barn now, too, sway-backed, stubborn as a fence post, pulled back from a place that had been ready to give up on him for good. "You're starting to act like you own this whole place," she'd tell him, low, while she filled his trough of a morning. He'd snort and paw the worn ground, entirely unbothered, as if to say he could tell her the very same thing right back. And in the deep quiet of those mornings, with the light just breaking gold across the ridgeline and the world still half asleep around her, the girl would sometimes stop and stand and simply listen to the wind moving through the grass, to the birds calling soft between the cottonwoods, to the settled, breathing silence of a place that had decided, after a long time alone, to live again. It didn't sound empty anymore. That was the thing she kept coming back to. It sounded like home. Cole still came by most days. It had stopped being about the fence a good while back. The fence stood straight now, every post anchored deep in the earth, every board sound under the hand. But he came anyway, with coffee in a battered old thermos, or a part she'd been needing, or just a pair of working hands and a long stretch of comfortable quiet to share the labor with. They had built something between them, the 2 of them, slow and careful, out of trust that had been broken clean through and mended right along the seam. Neither one of them seemed in any rush to put a name to it. She'd catch him watching her sometimes, when she was bent low over the garden rose or wrestling with a latch that had rusted shut, and there'd be a look on his face that she didn't have a word for yet. Something patient, something steady, something that asked nothing of her at all, and simply waited, and meant it down to the bone. And she found, to her own quiet wonder, that she didn't flinch away from it, the way she had flinched from kindness nearly her whole life. One evening, as the sun dropped low and turned the whole field to burning copper, the 2 of them sat together on the porch steps, 2 cups of coffee gone cold between them, and for a long stretch neither said much of anything at all. The silence wasn't the awkward kind. It was the other kind, the easy kind, the kind that comes only when 2 people have finally stopped bracing themselves for the other one to up and leave. "You ever think about what you want this place to be?" Cole asked after a while. It was the same question he'd put to her once, back in the early days, when the fence still leaned like a row of tired questions. The girl looked out over the land, the dark line of the ridge, the mended fences catching the last red of the light, the barn glowing faint against the dusk, looking for all the world like it had life left in it yet. "I used to just want it to survive," she said. "That was the whole of it back then. Just hang on. Just don't lose it. Just make it to the next morning." And now? She was quiet a moment, turning the cold cup in her hands. "Now I want it to live," she said. "I want it to mean something, and not just to me, to whoever it is that comes after, the same way it meant something to her." Cole nodded, slow, the way he did when a thing struck him as plain true. "That's a big difference," he said. "Surviving and living. A lot of folks never do learn the space between the 2. I know. Takes most a whole lifetime to figure it, he said. If they ever do. You're getting there quick. The girl almost smiled. Didn't leave me a lot of say in the matter, the way I came up. No, he allowed, looking off at the dark coming soft over the hills. But you had a say in what you do with it. That part was always yours. I won't let you hand that off to bad luck, Cassie. You stayed. Nobody made you. That was yours. She didn't answer him, but the words settled down into her, deep, the way good seed settles into well-turned earth. It was on a gray, still morning, with the first real chill of a turning season riding the air, that the girl found the last letter. She had been going through the cedar chest again, not searching for any one thing in particular, just sitting with it, the way a person will sit with old photographs on a quiet day, letting the past keep her company instead of haunt her doorway. And tucked down into the lining of the lid, behind a worn flap of fabric she had somehow passed right over every time before, was an envelope. It was sealed. Her name across the front, in that careful, looping hand she now knew nearly as well as her own. But beneath her name, the old woman had written something more. A small instruction. The kind of thing a person sets down only when she knows for certain she won't be there to hand it over in the flesh. Open this one last. After you've found all the rest. After you've stayed long enough to know whether you mean to go. The girl's hands went still in her lap. She understood, all at once, exactly what it was she was holding. This wasn't the letter that had pulled her up out of the rain and onto a northbound bus. It wasn't the journal. It wasn't the bundle of returned envelopes, or the song worn thin by all its waiting years. This was the last thing. The thing her grandmother had buried deepest of all, saved back for the very end. For a girl who, by the time she ever laid eyes on it, would already have her answer settled in her bones. The girl carried it to the kitchen table, sat down, and after one long, steadying breath, she slid it open. My Cassie, the letter began, if you've found this, then you've gone and done the very thing I hoped you would. You've stayed long enough to need it. You've stood where I stood, touched the same earth, cursed the same wind, more likely than not. And that means more to me than I have words enough to tell you. The girl's eyes were already stinging. I've a confession to make. The kind a person can only get out at the very end of things. I didn't have to do it this way. The letters, the box hid under the barn floor, the song, the journal, all of it tucked away in places where you'd have to dig to ever find it. I could have written the whole of it down plain, in one place, and handed it over to that lawyer to give you the very first day you came. But I didn't. Because I knew you, child. The girl frowned, even as the tears began to spill and blur the careful lines. Knew her? The two of them had never met. The old woman had passed on before they ever once stood in the same room, under the same roof. I knew you the way I knew your mother. The way, in the end, I came to know my own self. You came up in a place that taught you to expect nothing from anybody, that taught you every kindness comes with a hook buried somewhere inside it, that every open hand is only reaching out to take something back. I know that's how it was, because I watched the very same thing happen to my own girl in a different shape, and there wasn't a thing in the world I could do to stop it. So I knew that if I simply told you, flat out, that you were loved, you wouldn't have believed a word of it. You'd have taken it the way you'd been taught to take everything handed to you, as pity, as charity, as a thing you give a sad case to make your own self feel a little better at night. I didn't want to give you pity, Cassie. I wanted to give you proof. The girl pressed her hand hard against her mouth, so I hid it. Every last piece, in the ground, in the walls, in the corners of this place where only a soul who'd already decided to stay would ever think to go digging. I wanted you to have to work for the truth of it, with your own two hands. Because a thing you dig up out of the dark yourself, you believe. A thing you find on your own, you trust. For the rest of your days, I wanted you to walk this land and feel it choose you. Not because some old woman in a letter told you that you belonged here, but because you stayed long enough and dug deep enough to find out for yourself that you already did. You were never some sad case I took in out of guilt, child. You were chosen. From the very first picture of you that ever found its way into my hands. From the first morning, I pinned your little face up on the wall, right where the early light comes in first. You were chosen. Long, long before you ever learned how to choose your own self. The girl had stopped trying to hold the tears back at all. They came freely now, falling soft onto the worn wood of the table, and she let them come because there was no one left to hide them from. And because some crying isn't grief at all. Some crying is only a body, at long last, setting down a weight it has hauled around so long it forgot it was ever carrying anything. I don't know what you'll have decided, the letter said, near the end of it. By the time these words reach your eyes, you'll already have made the choice. So I won't ask you to stay. I won't ask you for one board, one sunrise, one single season more than you've a mind to give. But if you're sitting there reading this, then I expect you already know. This land will meet you right where you are, not where you've been, not who they told you all those years you had to be. Just you, plain and whole and enough. You came from somewhere. You belong to someone. And you are not, and you never once were. A mistake. I love you. Always have done. Even before I ever knew your name to speak it. Your grandmother, Nell. The girl sat at that table a long, long while after the words finally ran dry. The gray light moved slow across the floorboards. The wind worked quietly at the eaves, and little by little, the storm that had broken open in her chest eased back down into something quiet and clear and deep, like the spring water rising cold and patient out of the dark beneath the earth. She understood now, the whole long path of it laid out behind her, the letter handed over in the rain, the tarnished brass key, the green metal box under the barn floor, the lullaby, the hand-drawn map, the water rising up where a dead well had been. Her grandmother hadn't left her a ranch at all. She had left her a road, one the girl had to walk every step of herself, alone, on her own 2 feet, so that by the far end of it, she would have built, with her own hands, out of her own hard and stubborn belief, the one single thing in all the world that no one could ever simply give her outright. The certain knowledge that she belonged. It was the deepest kindness anyone had ever shown her in all her life, and it had been lying there, waiting, folded into the lining of an old chest, for the day she'd finally be ready to take it in, Della came back as the season turned toward cold, and this time she stayed, not all at once, not like a door flung wide open in a single grand gesture. It came the slow way real things come between two people who have wounded one another deep and chosen, in spite of all of it, to try. A day here, a long weekend there. A phone line left open and humming between them through the wide, quiet stretches in between. She helped out in the garden, her hands sure and gentle with the growing things in a way the girl had come to recognize now as the one good gift those long-lost years had left her with. She mended what she could around the place. She slept in the small back room and rose with the light, and learned by inches how to stand in a warm kitchen beside her own daughter without either of them bracing for the floor to drop out from under them. It wasn't whole. The girl knew that. Knew, too, that it might never be entirely whole. There were years stacked up between them that no number of shared mornings could ever hand back. But it was real. And real, the girl had long since decided, was worth a good deal more than whole had ever been. One cold, bright afternoon, with the sky scrubbed clean and high overhead, the two of them walked out together to the far back of the property, to the lone juniper, where a small flat stone marked the place that Nell Bennett had been laid to rest. There was no long inscription cut into it, no string of dates. Just her name, plain and firm in the gray stone, and beneath it, 2 words the girl had chosen all on her own. She stayed. Della crouched down low beside the stone. She reached out and touched it, slow, the way a person touches a thing they half expect, against all reason, to still be warm. She never once said that, Della murmured, not out loud. Not in all the years I knew her. She didn't have to say it, the girl answered. I think she said it every single day she didn't leave. Della's eyes filled and spilled over. Her voice came out thick and broken. I used to dream of coming back here, she said. Just the once. Just to stand right where I'm standing and tell her I was sorry. To ask her, straight to her face, if she could ever find it in her to forgive me for any of what I did. She would have, the girl said. You can't know that. You never met her. She'd have yelled first, the girl said, and a small, true smile found its way up onto her mouth. From everything I've been told, she'd have yelled fit to wake the dead. And then she'd have grabbed hold of you and hugged you so hard you couldn't draw a breath. And then, the smile widened. Then she'd have handed you a shovel and put you straight to work mucking out that barn. A sound broke out of Della that was half a sob and half a startled laugh, surprised clean out of her before she could stop it. She pressed her palm flat to the cold stone one moment longer. And then, gently, she let it go. As they walked back together toward the house, the wind came up across the open pasture, carrying the sharp green scent of juniper and sun-warmed earth. The girl tipped her face up into it and let it move clean over her. I think this place is healing, she said. Della looked over at her, eyes still soft and shining wet. Or maybe, she said quietly, it's you that's healing. The girl turned that over in her mind. Maybe, she said at last, maybe it's both of us. Maybe that's just how the thing works. The land, and the person standing on it. Neither one of them able to do the mending all alone. That night, long after the supper dishes were washed and set to dry, and the fire had burned down to a low and steady glow in the grate, The girl sat alone on the rug with a notebook open across her knees. It wasn't her grandmother's journal, that one she had read clear through, more times than she could count, until the words inside it no longer burned her to read. And then she'd set it up on the shelf where it belonged. Finished. Complete. A whole life, closed gently between two covers. This was a new one. Plain. Her own. She'd started keeping it some weeks back. Records of the cattle she meant to bring on come the spring. Notes on the garden. What had taken and what hadn't. Rough sketches of the new beds she wanted to lay out along the south wall. Plans for a place that, for the first time in 3 long generations, somebody fully intended to stay on and tend. She turned to a clean page now, and she wrote, in her own hand. The lines of it she'd begun to notice lately weren't so far off from the careful looping script she had come to know so well. Today the spring still runs, she wrote. The garden held strong through the cold snap. My mother's asleep in the back room, and the fire's warm, and the wind is up tonight. But the house stands firm against it, the way it always has. She paused. The fire popped and settled softly in the grate beside her. Today I read the last letter, she wrote, and I finally understood what she was trying to hand me all along. Not a place to live, a reason to believe I had any right to. She thought a moment longer. Then she wrote the last lines slow, pressing the pen down firm into the page. The way a person does when the words are the kind she fully means to keep. If someone's reading this someday, after I'm gone, then it means I stayed. And I want you to know the one thing it took me near a whole lifetime to learn. You came from somewhere. You belong to someone. And you are not a mistake. Keep digging. There's always more beneath the surface than the eye can see. She let the ink dry in the firelight. Then she closed the book and set it up on the shelf, right alongside her grandmother's. 2 journals now, side by side, 2 women's hands, the chain that had been broken for so long, hanging slack across the years, finally mended. One careful link joined to the next. She stepped outside before bed, barefoot on the cold porch boards. The wind was moving through the grass in long, slow waves, silver beneath a high and wandering moon. The barn stood in black silhouette against the dark, its mended roofline catching the faint light. Somewhere out past the far fence, an owl called once, low, unhurried, sure of its place in the night. And the girl could feel them all out there, in the moving dark, layered over the land like rings laid down deep inside the heart of a tree. Her grandmother, who had waited a whole long life and never once, not for a single day, let go of her hope. Her mother, who had run and lost herself out in the dark and found the long, hard road all the way back home. And the girl she herself had once been. The one who stepped down off a porch in the cold rain with a box that weighed next to nothing in her arms. The one who didn't do goodbyes. Because not one soul had ever stayed around long enough to earn one from her. That girl was still in her, somewhere. She always would be. But she wasn't drifting anymore. She had roots now. Deep ones. Watered, patient, and cold, from somewhere far below. She walked out to the very edge of the field, the cold grass soft and yielding beneath her bare feet, and she stood there a long while in the moving dark. The wind swirled around her, not cruel the way it had felt that first gray morning, standing soaked under a flickering street lamp, not daring her to run, just alive, just there, moving through her and past her, and on out across the wide and open country beyond. She didn't ask it to settle. She didn't brace herself against it. She just stood in it, her arms loose at her sides, her face turned up to the wide and ancient sky, and she let it move through her, clean and cold and free, like breath through a body that had finally, after far too long, decided to live. She belonged here. Not because a letter had told her so, not because a key had been pressed into her palm, or a deed signed over into her name down at a lawyer's quiet office. Not even because her grandmother had wanted it that way, or because her mother had come home at last. She belonged here because she had stayed, because she had dug for the truth with her own two blistered hands down through the dark and the dust and the doubt, and found it waiting there, and chosen it, freely, fully, finally, chosen to call it hers. This land had never once needed saving. It had only ever needed someone willing to stay. And out there, under the wide and watching stars, with the spring running cold beneath the dark and patient earth, and the whole quiet world breathing slow and easy all around her, the girl had stayed, and somewhere down in the long grass, the wind seemed to answer her, at the last, not with words. The land had never once needed words, but with a hum, low and warm and certain, moving through the dark toward her, like a welcome, like a breath that had been held far, far too long, finally and gratefully let go, like a voice that had waited a whole lifetime to say one simple thing, and could say it now, at long last, to someone who had stayed put long enough to hear it. Welcome home.